Are you ready to take your gardening to the next level and start selling your harvests? But how do you turn your backyard garden into a real business? What if I told you I've never worked on a farm, I've never owned a business, and I don't have a college degree? Yet I managed to scale my gardening hobby into a six-figure vegetable operation, and in this video, I'll walk you through step by step how I structured my small farm business, from choosing the right business structure like an LLC and getting the right licenses to tax exemptions, filing, and insurance. We're covering everything you need to know to transform your garden into a thriving, profitable business. Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Chef's Harvest Farm. If you're new here, I'm Chef Mikey. I'm a former executive chef turned urban farmer. I took my backyard gardening hobby and turned it into a thriving small-scale vegetable operation. I started out selling at farmers markets, but eventually shifted to a wholesale model, supplying high-quality organic vegetables to some of the best chefs in the greater Knoxville, Tennessee area. So just like anyone starting out with no experience, I began gardening in simple raised beds that I built out of wood and filled the soil from Home Depot. At first, it was just a fun hobby, but it didn't take long before I was growing more food than we could eat. Living on a busy road, I always thought about setting up a farm stand to sell extra produce, but instead, I started posting extra produce for sale on Facebook, and my co-workers were my first customers. However, my hobby wasn't cheap. I was spending about $300 a week on supplies to grow produce. Once I reached a certain level of production, it became clear that I needed to invest in refrigeration, wash pack equipment, and that's when I realized it was time to take things more seriously and form a legitimate business. At first, I had no clue where to start. I began researching all the forms and legal requirements for starting a business, which is overwhelming. That's when I came across a company called Zen Business. They handle all the paperwork for you, file necessary documents, and keep your business compliant year after year. These services do cost money, but for a few $100s a year, it took all the guesswork out and gave me peace of mind that my business was operating legally. You don't technically need a business license in Tennessee until you have over $10,000 in sales, but just to be safe, I contacted my county clerk. They issued me a minimal business license for businesses with under $10,000 in revenue. It was an easy and inexpensive way to make sure I was covered. Because once I started attending farmers markets, they required me to have a business license, even if my yearly revenue was under $10,000. The following year, my revenue exceeded the $10,000 threshold, and they just switched me over to a standard business license. That first year, I ended up claiming a $20,000 loss on my taxes, which turned into a huge tax savings. If I hadn't set up my LLC, I would have had to pay income tax on that $20,000 from my day job, but instead, I got it back as a tax return. While I didn't know much about forming a business initially, my background as an executive chef for multi-million-dollar food and beverage operations gave me a foundation in managing financial records, bookkeeping, and operations. Those skills became invaluable as I transitioned my gardening hobby into a legitimate, scalable business. Once I established my LLC and got my business license, I knew one of the biggest advantages for farmers like me was qualifying for a tax exemption. And trust me, you'll want to get this tax exemption before you start making any big purchases, because it can save you a ton of money. The reason? You won't have to pay sales tax on products that are directly used for growing crops like seeds, fertilizers, and tools. In Tennessee, all you need to qualify for an agricultural tax exemption is $1,000 in sales, which if you're selling anything, should be pretty easy goal to hit. But at that point, I hadn't filed for taxes for my business yet, so I didn't have any sales on the books. So I took a bit of a leap of faith and I wrote a letter to the IRS. I explained that I was starting a small farm and that I wanted to start making tax-deductible purchases to build my business. I mentioned that I was selling extra produce to coworkers and that I planned to attend farmers markets and sell to restaurants in the future. I also included a spreadsheet with projected sales for the upcoming year, hoping that would help strengthen my case. To my surprise, a few weeks later, I received a tax exemption in the mail. And since then, I've consistently cleared the $1,000 mark in sales each year to stay in compliance. Now, a big question I get is whether you need special licensing to sell produce. And in Tennessee, the answer is no, not for locally grown vegetables. Growing produce and selling it locally is considered low risk for foodborne pathogens, so there's no additional licensing requirements. However, if you start crossing state lines, things might change. And if you decide to sell meat, dairy, or eggs, or add animals like chickens, you may need extra licensing. But for now, as long as you're just selling raw veggies, you're good to go. I do have a greenhouse license which allows me to legally sell rooted plants. Typically this kind of licensing costs money, but I qualified for an exemption since my main form of revenue comes from vegetables, not plants. I simply had to show them my books to prove that the majority of my revenue comes from selling vegetables. The greenhouse license just helps me sell extra seedlings at the farmer's market when I have them available. Also have a license to grow cannabis, although 99% of my business revenue comes from vegetables. The cannabis is simply a passion project, but for most of you, setting up your LLC and getting your business license will be all you need to get started legally. Now let's dive into how I manage my taxes and accounting. Once I had my LLC set up for my business and started to grow, one of the first things I did was separate my business finances from my personal finances. I opened a business bank account and credit cards, which really helped me keep things organized. At this point, I was still working my full-time job, but I knew it was important to keep track of my farm's revenue and expenses, so I set up a QuickBooks account to help manage everything. However, I quickly realized that QuickBooks wasn't quite what I needed. As a farmer, I needed to be able to categorize expenses for Schedule F form, which is a requirement for farmers when filing taxes. Unfortunately, QuickBooks didn't allow me to do this effectively, so I had to look for an alternative. That's when I discovered FarmRaise, and I highly recommend it to any farmer who's just starting out or looking to make tax filing easier. FarmRaise is designed specifically for farmers, and everything is already set up with Schedule F categories, which made tracking expenses and revenue a lot simpler. It also sends out notices about available grants and funding opportunities, which is a huge benefit for anybody trying to scale their operation. If you're serious about farming as a business, FarmRaise is a game changer. Next, I need an efficient way to take payments, especially for my farmers market sales. So I opened up a Square account. Square is free to sign up for, and they send you a free credit card reader, which I use when I go to the farmers market. There are no monthly fees. Square just charges you a small fee when you use a digital payment like a credit card. Since I sell mostly to restaurants now, I only attend farmers markets occasionally, but it's still a super convenient way to take payments and keep track of customer orders. I also use my Square account to run payroll. My workers can clock in and out on their phone, and at the end of the week, I just press a couple buttons and everyone gets paid. And it takes care of all my payroll, taxes, and compliance, and it sends everybody a W-2 at the end of the year. For my business-to-business transactions with restaurants, I now only accept checks or wire transfer. So Square allows me to create and send invoices to my customers for free, and they can pay me via check or wire transfer. Once I get paid, I simply mark those invoices as paid in Square, and I don't incur any processing fees. The beauty of using Square and FarmRaise is that everything's linked together. Every time I use a credit card, it automatically goes into FarmRaise account, and it's categorized properly. And my Square account is also synced to FarmRaise, so that all my revenue automatically gets pulled in and categorized the way I need it to be for tax season. By keeping everything organized and linked together, I don't have to stress about missing out on deductions or not having the right records. Everything I need is right at my fingertips, making tax time so much less stressful. One of the most important steps I took on my farm as I started to grow was getting insurance to protect my business. At first, I didn't think much about it. I was just gardening in my backyard. But as I started selling produce and interacting with customers, I realized I needed to cover myself in case anything unexpected happens. I use Next Insurance for my liability coverage. This includes product liability, which protects me in case anyone ever gets sick from my produce, and general liability, which covers accidents that may happen either on the farm or off-site. This just gives me peace of mind knowing that I'm covered no matter where or how I'm selling my vegetables. On top of that, our homeowner's insurance is through Farm Bureau, and it covers the structures and equipment that I use on the farm, like my greenhouses and tractor. This is a great setup because it protects not just my farm business, but also the assets tied to it. If you're just starting out, I recommend looking into liability insurance first. It's usually the most essential for small farmers. For example, if you sell at a farmer's market or to restaurants, product liability insurance ensures you're covered if someone claims they got sick from something you sold. And general liability protects you from accidents, like if someone trips on your farm or if something happens while you're out delivering produce. The good news, insurance for small farms is pretty affordable. My liability insurance costs about $300 a year. Of course, costs will vary depending on your farm's size and location, so it's worth shopping around and getting quotes from different providers. I suggest starting with companies like Next, especially if you're looking for farm specific policies. And if you have structures like greenhouses or large equipment, check with your homeowner's insurance provider. They might be able to bundle coverage for your farm asset. Ultimately, getting the right insurance for your farm isn't just about complying with legal requirements, it's about protecting everything you've built and ensuring that one unexpected event doesn't wipe it all out. When I first started gardening in my backyard, scaling up to a profitable business wasn't even on my radar. But over time, as I started selling extra produce, I saw the potential to grow into something bigger. Scaling up didn't happen overnight. It was a process of making small, intentional investments and reinvesting profits back into the farm. One of the first major upgrades I made was building a mobile walk-in cooler. Proper refrigeration was a game changer. It allowed me to store larger quantities of produce while maintaining the quality needed for restaurant sales. Early on, I also realized the importance of staying organized and thinking strategically. I focused on growing fewer crops at higher volumes, which streamlined my workflow and reduced waste. Transitioning from farmers markets to wholesale sales with restaurants was another key step in scaling up. This shift not only saved me time, but also created a more predictable and stable income stream. But scaling up isn't just about infrastructure or sales. It's about learning and adapting. I invested in tools like FarmRaise for bookkeeping and Square for invoicing, which helped me manage finances and keep track of my growth. I also took every opportunity to learn, whether through networking, watching videos, or seeking out resources to improve my processes. Most importantly, I stayed patient. Farming is a long game, and success doesn't happen overnight. There were seasons when I made mistakes, lost crops, or faced unexpected challenges, but I kept pushing forward, learning from those experiences and making small improvements year after year. If you're trying to scale up your garden into a business, start small, focus on what's working, build relationships with your customers, and reinvest in the tools and infrastructure that will save you time and improve your product quality. Scaling up is about consistency, persistence, and making thoughtful decisions, not overnight success.